Okay, whenever you are ready, take it away.
All right, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Jeff, and today I'm joined by Kayla, Bryce, Anuj, Rob, and Billy, and together we're the Bad Assets Consulting Group. Now this is our 15th engagement together as a team, and between the 6 of us we have close to 50 years experience working with supply chain and agricultural businesses. So that really gives me the confidence to say that this graphic illustrates a common trend in the farming industry, and that is steadily declining net income and ultimately very volatile bottom line returns in both things that we can control and things that we cannot control, as we'll discuss later in the presentation. Well, what this has led us to believe is that the best course for our business is to diversify our business portfolio by expanding trucking business and decreasing farming to provide the greatest future benefit for Meekin Enterprises. And in proving this, we're going to walk you through why the farming industry has been more volatile. We're going to talk about restructuring the farming efforts to improve the bottom line, which is one of these things that we can control that I discussed, why the trucking industry provides a great growth opportunity, and finally, and perhaps most importantly, how the new initiatives will be financed effectively. And now I'm going to circle back to the first point, and Anuj is going to speak to you about why the farming industry has been more volatile.
Thanks, Jeff. So today I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about why the farming industry has been a bit more volatile. And with that, I'll get into some of the financials behind it, and on top of that, I'll touch on a key factor, which is the lack of supply of labor. So I want to circle back to this chart again to emphasize and reiterate how crucial it is to see that in 2014 our net income was up over $130,000, and in 2016 we had a sharp decrease down to about $3,500. And I don't know about you, but I would not want to be living off $3,500 a year. So because of this is one of the main reasons we believe that we should go out of farming a little bit. Now here we have a chart illustrating the contribution margin of the farming sector for Meekin from 2014 to 2016. And the main thing I would like to highlight here is from 2015 to 2016, we have a significant decrease from $339,000 down to less than $150,000. And it's important to realize the difference with farming industry and other industries when it comes to contribution margin. So in other industries, you will have the variable expenses taken out after you incur your revenues. So say, for example, a company has a bad quarter or a bad year, their revenues will be lower, but their variable expenses will also be lower. This is different in the farming industry because all the variable expenses are taken out prior to revenues being incurred. So as a result, as we saw, for example, in 2016 when we did not have a great year, the numbers clearly showed it's affected in the contribution margin significantly. So the revenues were much lower and the variable expenses were the same amount, unfortunately. So here I want to illustrate the acreage for Meekin Farms. Now in the blue we have the amount of acres owned for the company. In the orange we have the amount of acres rented, and in the gray we'll have the total acres that owned and rented added up. So from 2014 to 2016 we have shown an increase in the amount of acres owned, and in 2017 we also have a projection here that shows we will own 1,200 acres because in January Meekin bought 320 acres of land. At the same time, from 2015 to 2016, we have seen a decrease in the amount of acres rented. And our 2017 projection, going along with our plan to decrease farming, we have decided to significantly decrease the amount of acres rented down to just over 1,000 acres owned, or rented, sorry. Now, I want to point out the fact that the farming industry, the land for the farms, has been appreciating, the land has been appreciating in value over the past few years, and we believe as a team that it will continue to appreciate in value. So as a result, we are happy to, we want Meekin to be investing in land so that, say, 10 years down the line, if they want to sell the farm, sell the land, they will be able to, and they'll make money on that investment as well. So with the land that's rented, we see that per acre it's worth about $45 and $62 per acre, depending on how good the soil is, how good the land is. And the acres owned, each acre is worth between $1,000 and $2,500 a significant increase from owned to rented. So as a result, that's why we would like to purchase more land, so in the long run, when we do sell it off, it'll be a great appreciation value for the land. So here we have the unemployment rate for Saskatchewan. From 2014 to 2016, we have seen a bit of an increase of about 1% per year. And the reason behind this, which I will touch on in a moment, is due to, not completely due to, but one of the major reasons is with the farming, how they have been focused more on this new style, which involves a lot more new equipment. And I'll touch on it briefly, but the older generation is struggling with this. So the skilled labor is in short supply for farming. Farming is a very difficult industry to be in. There's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot you need to know in order to be a successful farmer. So this increase in the use of farming equipment over the past few years, there has been more and more equipment used and less manual labor per se. And this is something that the older generation is struggling with. So for example, a lot of times farms are a family-run business, but grandparents and things like older people for the farm, they are unable to handle this new farming equipment because they don't quite understand how to use it, or it's just a little bit more difficult to use. So as a result, you are lacking that labor, you're lacking these extra hands to use when it comes to the farm.
Then why are you suggesting we purchase more land?
Because the option we've chosen overall is to decrease the total amount of land. And as we have already purchased that 320 acres, we decided we might as well keep that and decrease the amount of land rented. So that
What's
overall,
the upside to doing that though? So obviously you see some financial upside to doing away with our leases and actually making the acquisition. So I assume you're relying on the land to appreciate at a value that makes it feasible, even if we face these kind of shortages.
Right, yeah, we are relying on the land to appreciate in value, and we will touch on the farming, the numbers more later on in the presentation.
Okay. All right.
So another issue is that the younger generations, they're not so much interested in the farming industry, but there has been an increased move towards getting your post-secondary education, going to college. So, these teenagers and people in the early 20s, they are not necessarily going into the farming business with their family, but they are going out getting an education and wanting to go away into other sectors, other industries. And as a result, that's another huge population of people that are not working on the farm, not helping out. Unfortunately, these are the people that we would see being able to handle the new farming equipment better. In this day and age, we see technology with iPads everywhere, where kids are born with iPads practically, whereas the older generation, they might struggle with using such technology, and the same applies in the farming industry as well. Now, third point I want to bring up with the lack of skilled labor, David Meekin himself, he has mentioned that he would like to work less when it comes to the farm. For him personally, he has stated that he feels he's been overworked and he's had a lot of management responsibility, which is fair considering the property is very, very large.
Why not just hire a manager?
Yeah, that's what hopefully our plan is, for him to hire management, hire skilled labor, but that's part of the problem, that there is a lack of the skilled labor.
But in your financial calculations, are you going to get at the hiring of a manager? Is that something that you baked into your financial analysis, or?
We ultimately decided that he wanted less responsibility, more so than anything. So when we alleviated his duties with less acreage to take care of, and he can devote that responsibility to the trucking industry, that will alleviate him a little bit. So that's ultimately what we're hitting on. He doesn't want to stop, he doesn't want to give the manager everything, he still wants to do it on his own. However, he wants to be relieved of some pressures.
Okay.
So as I was mentioning, David Meekin, he wants to do a little bit less work and spend more time with his loving family. Here we have his wife Nicole and his daughter, I'm not sure her name at the moment. But he would like to spend more time with his family, and with this, that would require him to be a little bit less involved. So to summarize what I've been talking about, the key here for Meakin Farms is to decrease their farming because of the lack of skilled labor and the financials that we've seen have been decreasing in value. And with that, I'll hand it off up to Bryce to talk about how we can better utilize the land.
All right, thank you. So with those farming issues, I believe that restructuring the farming efforts will improve the bottom line. So the two ways that we can restructure farming is increased focus on crop rotation, which is the practice of moving around the crops from field to field so they're not planted there more than 1 year in a row. And crop selection, which is the practice of allocating the fields with the certain types of crops by changing the percentage of the crops on the farm. So the benefits of crop rotation are disease prevention and increased yields. So in this graphic we can see some of the benefits of disease prevention in regards to crop rotation if we were continue to plant canola on the farm, which is the biggest crop by Meakin. So if you were to not rotate it and keep it like a canola, if you plant canola on a canola field, it's recommended actually to wait 3 years before doing that because you have a very high chance of disease spread between the 2 years. And then if you go down to wheat, there's actually no diseases in common, so you can actually plant canola on a field right after wheat or wheat right after canola. As you can see, there is a 1 year wait period for field peas with canola, but it's also a very low probability, and even though it's still not zero like wheat, is a big reduction than if it was canola with canola. The other thing is increased yield, and the key to increasing the yields of the other plants is planting them on a field after field peas. So with 100% being the baseline of, like, if you did not rotate, so field peas on field peas, it's just be 100%. You get a 47% increased yield from wheat and a 96% increase for canola if planted on a field right after field peas.
Do you have this tied into what we were saying earlier, the contribution margin at some point?
Yes, I will do,
Okay.
very shortly. So the next topic is crop selection. So the 3 crops on Meakin Farms are canola, wheat, and field peas. Canola has seen a great increase over the past 3 years by Meakin Farms, and I think this is due to its high selling price compared to the others. But since it requires a 2-step harvesting process, it also has double the cost in regards to equipment, fuel, and labor. Wheat, on the other hand,
Before you move on, so doesn't it have a higher fertilizer cost as well?
Yes, but it wasn't. It's not part of the harvesting process. So
I
I
see.
listed it separately.
Thank you.
Wheat, on the other hand, is more in the middle of the 2 crops, but as you saw earlier, it has great advantages in terms of crop rotation and disease prevention. So before I talk about field peas, I just want to show some graphics that show the connection between canola and wheat and how they've changed over the past 3 years. So here we can see the use of the land over the past 3 years, and as you can see, field peas stayed the same, and canola has grown as wheat has decreased. Now, if you look at, I'm going to bring back the contribution margin slide from before, and we'll see how the changes have affected it. So from earlier in the presentation, we can see that contribution margin has dropped greatly since canola has become the largest crop on Meakin Farms. I think a big reason behind this is the double harvesting cost, making the contribution margin of the overall farm a lot less. So I think the key to solving this problem is the focus on field peas. Field peas not only does not have the double harvesting costs, but it benefits the soil by fixing nitrogen levels, which also can increase land value. But most importantly, field peas have the highest revenue per acre. So on this table, we can see the changes in revenue per acre for the 3 crops over the last 3 years. In 2014, field peas was the lowest, but in 2016, it has passed both canola and wheat. And now if you put this on a line graph, we can also see that it is growing at a faster rate than the other crops. So we can most likely see even higher revenue per acre in the future years. So the overall strategy I'm proposing is that to utilize the 2,240 acres remaining on the farm, Beacon should focus on increasing the amount of field peas to take advantage of the benefits to the soil, the low cost, and the increasing revenue per acre. He should maintain wheat levels so he can take advantage of the benefits of crop rotation and disease prevention, and reduce the amount of canola to avoid its double harvesting costs and make room for the more profitable field peas. So by implementing this plan, we can see benefits in the reduced acreage at the farm while increasing our focus on the farming industry, which will now be discussed by Rob.
So, before you pass it, based on the numbers alone, your recommendation makes sense, but there's no tie to a quality issue for peas. Like, why are they growing so much faster than everything else? Especially, I mean, it's pretty easy to see that they're growing since we keep them stable at 10% the entire time. So any growth that comes in is from extra selling prices, lower costs, something along those lines. But why is the growth so big?
I think it's the increase in price is the big one, but the other thing that's important, like they're not as high priced as canola, but the reason I went with revenue per acre is because we're trying to utilize the land, and field peas takes up less space, so you can get more sales per acre. So when we're reducing farming, we can still maintain high sales by using field peas to take advantage of the reduced acres.
Okay.
Rob?
Yeah, all right, thank you, Bryce. So as Bryce mentioned, Meakin Industrial has actually done quite well as of late. In fact, in 2016, Meakin Industrial posted one of their best net earnings in the past few years, and they did so with inclement weather in the Saskatchewan area from hail damage. This hail damage actually affected many farms in the area, including Meakin Farms, so it goes to show that Meakin Industrial is independent to this risk. Alongside that, they also made a $100,000 investment to expand their bin hauling operation in the trucking industry that we're going to move on to forward, that has some positive returns in the future. So, Meakin Industrial had its success with three main types of hauling. These three types are bin hauling, grain hauling, seed, fertilizer, and chemical hauling. Bin hauling provides bins, on-site grain bins, to farmers. And the reason why they've been doing so well is because the number of farms in Saskatchewan has actually been decreasing, while the average acreage per farm has been increasing. With these greater distances on each farm, the distance to the grain terminal to the field has increased as well. So farmers want on-site grain bins to ease their trips or something like that. Grain hauling is the transferring of large amounts of grain in certain times in terms of tons. As the acreage per farm is increasing, each farmer is going to want more and more grain, and they're not going to be able to transfer this on their own, so they're going to hire a third party, such as Meakin Industrial. And the last one, seed, fertilizer, and chemical hauling. This is not something a farmer can do on their own. They need specialized trucks, which Meakin Industrial provides. You need to use specialized trucks because these things are actually quite corrosive to normal trucks. So that's quite useful. So each one of these sectors have certain types of customers. Bin hauling has two extremely large customers that provide around $150,000 worth of revenue. Unfortunately, one of these customers left Meakin Industrial at the beginning of 2015. So our numbers actually decreased in terms of bin hauling revenue in 2015 and 2016. But thankful enough for us, he returned in the beginning of 2017 and offered us a handsome 5% price increase. So we can see that moving forward in 2017. Moving forward to grain hauling, we have around 10 to 15 customers in a 100-kilometer radius. And one of the biggest customers is Meakin Farms. David Meakin was smart enough to minimize costs for Meakin Farms by using equipment and technology from Meakin Industrial. So Meakin Industrial also helps Meakin Farms too. And lastly, seed, fertilizer, and chemical hauling has a varying amount of number year to year, but they also do business in a 100-kilometer radius. So as I mentioned to you guys before, the number of farms in Saskatchewan has been decreasing. As we can see here, from 2006 to 2011, faced around a 17% decrease. And then from 2011 to 2016, faced a 6.6% decrease. But as I mentioned, the relationship is actually inverse, so we can see that the average farm area in Saskatchewan has been increasing drastically. We went from 1,450 acres on average in 2006 to a booming 1,668 acres in 2011. Then that number also went up another 7% coming into 2016. This is very important because as the average acreage per farm increases, so do our sectors and our types of hauling, which will only benefit Meekin Industrial, and the future is quite bright.
But that's only based on, it looks like there's a consolidation of farmland, right? Meaning there's less owners but more land per owner.
Mhm.
So if there's a
Yes.
consolidation of ownership of this land, how are we tapping into that? Especially if we only have 2 contracts.
Well, we have 2 contracts for bin hauling. We have many
Sure.
more contracts for the other types of hauling.
Right.
And I understand your concern with the amount of farmers, or the amount of farms themselves decreasing, but at the end of the day, we still have 34,523 farms to work with, which I think is quite a large number. And as the acreage is continuing to increase, the use for bins and grain hauling and all these things is we're gonna see it increase a lot because farmers can't do these things on their own.
While that's true, the consolidation itself almost means that there's higher power given to them over us, right? So the more that they consolidate, the more they can ask for cost decreases or price decreases because we still need the business.
Right, and I do agree with that, and at the same time, I can't honestly say what their thought process is when they're consolidating like that. But even if the cost does go down slightly, I will say that the demand will increase because, like I said, like they're going to need more bins. You know, they can't transfer tons and tons of grain by themselves. You know, they can't go and get tons of fertilizer for a property like that. And yeah, the number of farmers themselves are decreasing, but smaller farms aren't where Meekin Industrial is making their money. Meekin Industrial is making the money from bigger farms, and as we can see, the farms are getting bigger and bigger each year, which means our clientele is actually increasing, even though the total number is decreasing. So let's take a look at the statement of earnings, which can quantify things a little bit better. So as I mentioned, in 2014, bin hauling had a great deal of revenue, with 150,000 of that being from those 2 customers. And as we can see in 2015 and 2016, it fell a decent amount because we lost one of those 2 customers. However, if you look at grain hauling and chemical hauling, those have been increasing each year. And I was trying to tie that to the amount of acreage increase as well. We can project that in 2017, these numbers will increase as well. And if we can tie that with with 2014 numbers for bin hauling, along with a 5% increase, I think our bottom line can really improve substantially.
Do you have 2017 projections?
We do, and that's coming up later from Billy.
Okay.
And as I was saying, one of my first points that I made, our bottom line was one of the best that Meekin Industrial has had in many years, and they managed to do this with hail damage affecting over 640 acres of Meekin farms and affecting many, many, many other farms as well. That just goes to show that Meekin Industrial is independent to certain risks, and it would be a smart way to diversify it rather than depend strictly on farming. They should increase this sector. But how are we going to finance that? And as you said, what are the projections for something like that? Well, as I said, Billy Barber is going to explain that to you.
Thank you, Rob. So the last thing we want to emphasize as a group is how these new initiatives will be financed effectively. So in other words, how do we know that these investments and these decisions that we're making are going to be proven worthwhile and are feasible? So the first step we decided to take in order to figure this out is we decided to come with a 2017 projected statement of earnings for Meekin Industrial, factored into the fact that we're getting one of our customers back and that customer is offering a price increase. So as you can see, it's going to bring our total revenue to 424,957, and it will increase our net earnings by 119,147. And of course, when you look at that number compared to 2016, that is a 384% increase from the prior year. And it just goes to show how getting one of our customers back, and with that price increase, is able to really increase our bottom line. So now we looked at the earnings. So let's take a look at some of the financing and some of our cash outflows from these decisions. So as you can see, we decided to compare the total cash outflow from our option of expanding the trucking business and decreasing the farm size versus if we were to increase our farm size and decrease our trucking business. And as you can see, both options require a land purchase of $260,000, which 75% of it is financed at a 4% mortgage rate, which that number comes out to be $7,800 for both options of interest related to the mortgage. And of course, both options require a $100,000 investment for bin hauling for trucking and a $100,000 investment for equipment for the farming, which both of those options are with 50% of it financed at an 8% interest rate, which gives us $4,000 worth of interest alone. But the main thing I want to draw your attention to is the difference in how much land we're leasing and the cash outflows associated with that. As you can see with the trucking expansion, since we're decreasing our farm size, that means we're leasing less land at 1,040 acres at $55 per acre, which gives us a total cash outflow of $57,200 per year. Compared to if we were to expand the farm instead, we would be leasing at a whopping 2,960 acres at $55 per acre, which brings our total cash outflow to that option up all the way up to $162,800. So with that in mind, you can see that the total cash outflows for the trucking expansion will be lesser than the farming expansion, with $429,000 for trucking and $534,600. So we know that it will require a lesser cash outflow, but how do we know that these investments will actually be worthwhile? We need a measure to compare that to, such as a return on investment. So going back to our projected statement of earnings for Meekin Industrial, if we were to take the $100,000 bin hauling investment and isolate it and figure out what kind of return we will get on that, we will find that we will get a return on investment of 47.3% for bin hauling, and that is by taking the percentage of revenue that bin hauling has for 2017, and then taking that percentage and multiplying that by our net earnings to figure out our earnings for bin hauling alone, and then taking that number and dividing it by the $100,000, and that's how you would get your 47.3% of ROI. So how would this ROI compare to if we were to expand our farming business and decrease our trucking business? So as you can see, we decided to come up with a projected statement of earnings for our farming business if we were to undergo that option instead. And as you can see, this will give us our total revenue of just over $1 million and give us a net earnings of $4,602, which first of all isn't that much of an increase over the prior year, despite our much increased acreage. And that number would only give us a 4.6% ROI with our $100,000 seeding and harvesting investment. So 47.3% ROI for trucking versus the 4.6% with our investment of seeding and harvesting. You can clearly see that with the investment for the expansion of our trucking business, it's much more worthwhile than if we were to take that money and invest it in seeding and harvesting equipment with the expanding farming option. And with that, can
you go back first? Where did you get your projections for sales and revenue at the top?
Okay, so since we expected the current trends for 2016 to continue, so we decided to take our projections primarily based on the prior year's numbers. So for example, with our total revenue, we decided to take the average total revenue per acreage of the 3 years to get our total revenue per acre, and then taking that number and multiplying it by the number of acres that we have for 2017, and that's how we would get our total revenue for 2017.
Is that realistic though? I mean, the sales, I would assume sales for 2014, 2015 would probably be more representative of a steady state.
Mhm.
Because we know 2016 was horrible with weather, right? And then build in the risk later. So I would assume with more land would come more revenue, which would mean more to the bottom line. And then there's what? Where's the cost coming from? So you're saying even though we're not making the same amount of money as we would, I get where you're coming from, average of 3 years, it makes sense. It just doesn't seem realistic. And then the cost seems a little, I don't know. So how did you do the expenses then?
So the way we did our expenses is that we took the prior year's expenses and we took that number and divided it by the acreage for 2016 to get our expenses per acre. And then taking that expenses per acre and then multiplying it by the acreage for 2017, we were able to come up with our expenses for 2017 by undergoing that method. And of course, with that method, we were able to project a net earnings of $4,602
So
for
did you
2017.
did you average that too? So basically what I'm saying is you take, I agree with the way you did it, right? So it has to be a cost per acre.
Yeah.
The problem is if you break down cost per acre for each of the 3 years and then average that and then build that into the acreage, is that how we did it? Or is it just a cost per acreage, like averaged over the 3
It's
years?
based off of 2016. See, the problem with that method is that the acreage amount is different. So this is all pretty much based on how many acres that the farm has.
Right.
So by taking an average per acre, it makes more sense to figure out the expenses that way.
Right, I would assume it'd be more accurate the more years you take though,
Mhm.
is what I'm saying. So if you base it just off 2016, I don't know if that's really representative of the entire cost per acre.
But the thing is, with the whole effect of global warming and like let's not forget the 2016 numbers. They were based, a lot of it was based on bad weather. But with the thing about global warming and how it's become an increasing problem over time, like we expect the weather to be even more crazy the next year. So that's why we primarily base our numbers off of 2016, because we still expect the weather to be not be in our favor.
So is there a sensitivity analysis somewhere for this stuff? Whether, based on risks, what the risks would do to our bottom line or even the revenues?
It's a very good thing to look at, and I will follow you up with that once I look into the sensitivity factor.
Fair enough.
All right. So now Kayla is going to wrap this up.
Thank you, Billy. So we have taken a look at the two main sectors that Beacon Enterprises has. We've taken a look at the farming side of things, and we have noticed some volatility. We have seen a growth in an unemployment rate, and we have seen some shocking numbers about the growth in farm size and the decreasing number of farms itself. We've also looked at a lot of opportunities that the trucking industry has and what we should be moving forward with it. So as a team, with our 15 years and 50 years worth of research, we can conclude as a bad assets that Beacon Enterprises should expand their trucking business and decrease their farming in order to get the greatest future benefit. This is because the farming industry has been more volatile, and as this has been noted before, we have a growth in the unemployment rate, we have some